Get off my flight deck. I don't share a cockpit with diversity hires." Those were the last words Captain Richard Sterling thought he would ever have to say to the young woman standing next to him. He was a veteran of the skies, a man who believed the captain's word was law. She was young, black, and in his eyes, completely out of place in the cockpit of a $60 million Gulfstream jet. Sterling thought he had the power to crush her career before it even started. He thought he could humiliate her, ground her, and send her packing. But Captain Sterling made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't check who signed the checks. He didn't know that the woman he was trying to kick off the plane wasn't just his co-pilot. She was his new boss. And by the time the wheels touched the ground, his life would never be the same. This is the story of how arrogance met its match. The wind at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey cut through the tarmac like a knife. It was a grey, steel-coloured morning, the kind that promised turbulence and delays. Standing beneath the wing of a pristine Gulfstream GI-104IR, one of the most expensive private jets in the world, was Captain Richard Sterling. Richard was 58 years old, with silver hair specifically cut to make him look like an astronaut from the 1960s. He had 25,000 flight hours, a pristine uniform, and an ego that required its own hangar. He was checking the landing gear, his eyes scanning the hydraulic lines with the boredom of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He was the chief pilot for Apex Charter, a company that catered to Wall Street billionaires and tech moguls. He checked his watch. His first officer was late, or so he thought. "Good morning, Captain." The voice was calm, melodic, and confident. Richard didn't look up immediately. He finished inspecting the brake line, then slowly turned, expecting to see one of the ground crew guys or perhaps the caterer. Instead, he saw Alicia. Alicia Thorne was 29, though she looked younger. She was a black woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a posture that commanded respect. She wore the standard pilot's uniform, crisp white shirt, black tie, and on her shoulders the 3 gold bars of a first officer. She held her flight bag in one hand and an iPad in the other. Richard stared at her. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her shoulders, then back at her face, his lip curling slightly. He didn't return the greeting. "The flight attendant is supposed to be prepping the galley," Richard said, turning back to the landing gear. "Go inside. Make sure the coffee is dark roast. Mr. Vance hates acidity." Alicia didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply took a step closer, the wind whipping her tie. "I'm sure the flight attendant, Sarah, will handle that when she arrives, Captain. I'm Alicia Thorne, your first officer for this leg to London." Richard froze. He dropped the flashlight he was holding. It clattered onto the concrete. He slowly picked it up, wiped it off, and stood to his full height, towering over her. "You're joking," he scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "I don't joke about flight protocols, Captain," Alicia said, extending a hand. "I've completed the external walk-around on the starboard side. Fuel load is confirmed at 40,000 pounds. We're ready for APU start." Richard didn't shake her hand. He looked at it like it was covered in grease. "Thorne? I don't know a Thorne. I requested Miller for this trip. Miller has experience. Miller knows how I fly." "Miller is out on sick leave," Alicia replied, her hand dropping to her side, but her chin staying high. "Dispatch assigned me. I'm type-rated on the G650 with 4,000 hours on type. I'm ready to go." Richard laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that echoed against the aluminum fuselage. 4,000 hours. Fly in what? Simulators? Look, sweetheart, this isn't a regional hop to Cleveland. We are flying Elias Vance. He's worth $10 billion. He expects the best. He expects professionalism. "And he will get it," Alicia said, her voice hardening just a fraction. "If we start the pre-flight," Richard stepped into her personal space. "Let me be clear. Apex Charter has a reputation, an image. When our clients walk up the stairs, they want to see experience. They want to see stability. They don't want to see—" He gestured vaguely at her, referencing her entire existence. "A diversity quota filling a seat." The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I earned my seat, Captain," Alicia said softly. "We'll see about that," Richard spat. "Get in the plane. Don't touch the flight management system. Don't touch the radios. You sit on your hands and you speak when spoken to. If you make one mistake, I'm leaving you on the tarmac in London and you can swim home." He brushed past her, his shoulder checking hers hard enough to make her stumble slightly. Alicia watched him stomp up the air stairs. She took a deep breath, adjusting her jacket. She had dealt with men like Richard Sterling her entire life. She knew the type. They were gatekeepers. But Richard didn't know that Alicia wasn't just looking for a gate to open. She owned the fence. She gripped her flight bag tighter and followed him up the stairs. The war had begun. The cockpit of a Gulfstream G650 is a marvel of modern engineering, screens, avionics, and controls worth millions of dollars. It is a workspace designed for seamless cooperation. But as Alicia strapped herself into the right seat, the atmosphere was suffocatingly hostile. Richard was already in the left seat, aggressively flipping switches, bypassing the standard challenge and response checklist protocol. This was dangerous. In aviation, you always verbalize the checks. "Captain," Alicia said, pulling up the checklist on her iPad. "Pre-start check. Oxygen masks." Richard ignored her. He was punching coordinates into the flight management system, FMS. "Captain," Alicia said, louder this time. "Checklist protocol requires—" "I know the protocol," Richard snapped, slamming his hand on the center console. "I have flown this jet since before you were in middle school. I don't need a babysitter reading off a screen." "It's not about babysitting. It's about safety," Alicia countered calmly. "And it's mandatory. Oxygen masks?" Richard glared at her, his face flushing red. "Checked. 100%. Hydraulic pumps?" "Auto," he grunted. Alicia continued, forcing him to acknowledge every item, even as he huffed and rolled his eyes. She was professionally cornering him. She was perfect, and that made him hate her even more. Suddenly the cockpit door opened. Sarah, the flight attendant, poked her head in. She was a kind woman in her 40s who had flown with Richard for years and knew his temper. She looked nervous. "Captain, catering is on board. Mr. Vance's car just pulled through the security gate. He'll be here in 5 minutes." "Fine," Richard barked. "Get the coffee, and tell the ground crew to pull the chocks." "Wait," Alicia interjected. "We haven't received our final clearance from ATC, Air Traffic Control, yet. The weather pattern over the Atlantic has shifted. We need to check the fuel load again." Richard spun his chair around to face her. "Are you deaf? I said we are going. I checked the weather. It's clear." "The report updated 2 minutes ago, Captain," Alicia said, turning her iPad to show him. "Severe turbulence reported over the jet stream at flight level 450. We need to reroute south. That adds 30 minutes. We need an extra 2,000 pounds of fuel." Richard slapped the iPad out of her hand. It fell to the floor with a loud thud. The screen didn't crack, but the silence that followed was deafening. Sarah gasped from the doorway. "I am the captain," Richard hissed, leaning in so close Alicia could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "I decide the fuel. I decide the route. You are here to drop the landing gear and talk on the radio. If you try to delay my flight with your incompetence, I will call dispatch right now and have you removed for insubordination. Do you understand?" Alicia looked down at her iPad, then back up at him. Her eyes were cold fire. If we fly your route, we hit severe clear air turbulence. It puts the passengers at risk. FAA regulation 91.3. To hell with the regulations, Richard shouted. I am the regulation on this plane. He grabbed his headset and jammed it on his head, signaling the conversation was over. Sarah, close the door. We're starting engines. Sarah looked at Alicia, eyes wide with apology, then slowly closed the cockpit door. Alicia picked up her iPad. She didn't say a word. She knew that arguing further would cause a scene in front of the client, and right now she needed to play the long game. She buckled her harness. Let him dig his grave, she thought. I'll just make sure he doesn't bury us all in it. She reached for the radio to call for clearance, but Richard's hand shot out and slapped hers away from the controls. I'll handle the radio, he sneered. I don't want them thinking I'm running a training flight. Alicia sat back, her hands in her lap. This was a direct violation of crew resource management, CRM. It was grounds for immediate license suspension. Richard Sterling wasn't just a racist, he was a dangerous cowboy, and he had no idea that the training pilot next to him had just sent a text message to the board of directors of Apex Charter. The message read, Initiate Phase 2. He's worse than the report said. 5 minutes later, the main cabin door opened. Elias Vance boarded the plane. Vance was a tech mogul, a man who made billions in data processing. He was always on his phone, always in a rush, and known for being incredibly demanding. He paid $15,000 an hour for this jet, and he expected perfection. Richard put on his best, charming pilot face. He unbuckled and stepped out of the cockpit to greet the VIP, leaving Alicia strapped in. Mr. Vance, Richard boomed, his voice dripping with fake charisma. Welcome aboard. We're ready for an immediate departure. Smooth skies ahead. Vance didn't look up from his BlackBerry. I need to be in London by 8:00 p.m. local time, Sterling. No delays. I have a meeting that determines the future of my company. Absolutely, sir. We'll make up time in the air, Richard promised. A promise Alicia knew he couldn't keep without flying dangerously fast. Vance finally looked up, glancing into the open cockpit. He saw Alicia. New co-pilot? Vance asked, raising an eyebrow. Richard let out a small, conspiratorial chuckle. Ah, yes. Dispatch sent a substitute. Regular guy is sick. Don't worry, sir. I'll be handling all the complex flying. She's just here to handle the paperwork. Alicia heard every word. Her grip on the armrest tightened until her knuckles turned white. She's just here for the paperwork. Vance frowned, looking at Alicia with a critical eye. She looks young. Does she know the G6F50? I don't like training days on my dime, Sterling. I completely agree, sir, Richard said, seizing the opportunity. He leaned in, lowering his voice, but ensuring Alicia could still hear. To be honest, I tried to send her back. She was late, her uniform is sloppy, and she's been arguing about the fuel load. But you know how it is these days. Diversity mandates. He used the word like a slur. Vance looked annoyed. I don't care about politics, Sterling. I care about my schedule. If she's incompetent, get her off. I tried, sir, Richard lied smoothly. But if we wait for a replacement, we lose our takeoff slot. We'd be delayed 2 hours. Vance groaned. Fine. Just keep her away from the important stuff. If I spill my scotch because of a bad landing, you're both fired. Understood, sir. I'll fly smooth as glass, Richard said, flashing a winning smile. Richard turned back to the cockpit, a smug look of victory on his face. He had successfully poisoned the client's opinion of Alicia. If anything went wrong now, he had a scapegoat. If everything went right, he was the hero who overcame an incompetent co-pilot. He strapped back into his seat, glancing at Alicia. "You hear that?" he whispered. "Don't touch anything." Alicia turned to him, her face calm, almost serene. "The wind is picking up, Captain. Crosswinds are gusting 35 knots. You're going to need me on the rudder." "I don't need you for anything," Richard growled. He keyed the mic. "Teterboro Tower, Apex 404, ready for taxi, runway 19. As the massive engine spooled up, whining with power, Alicia checked the engine instruments. She saw the vibration monitor on the number 2 engine spike slightly. It was within limits, but it was a warning. "Captain, check engine 2 vibration," she said. "It's fine," Richard yelled. "Stop looking for problems." He released the brakes. The jet lurched forward. Richard taxied fast. Too fast. He was angry, he was rushing, and he was flying with a chip on his shoulder, the size of the aircraft itself. As they lined up on the runway, the controller came over the radio. "Apex 404, cleared for takeoff. Caution, wind shear reported on departure." "Wind shear," Alicia repeated. "We should use max thrust, not reduced." "I'm saving fuel because someone wanted to overload us," Richard snapped. He pushed the throttles forward. "Takeoff power set." The jet roared down the runway. The acceleration pinned them to their seats. At 130 knots, Richard called, "V1." Then, "Rotate." He pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The G650 left the ground. And then, all hell broke loose. Just as the wheels left the tarmac, a violent gust of wind slammed into the side of the aircraft. Simultaneously, a loud bang echoed from the right side of the plane. The aircraft yawed violently to the right, dipping its wing toward the ground. "Engine failure!" Alicia shouted. "Engine failure on number 2. The plane was only 50 feet off the ground, banking hard, losing lift. The ground was rushing up to meet them. Richard froze. For a split second, the most critical second, he froze. The arrogance vanished, replaced by sheer panic. Alicia didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for orders. "I have controls!" she yelled. She slammed her hand onto the throttle quadrant and grabbed the yoke. The Gulfstream G612ER is a 60-ton beast of aluminum and composite, and with the right engine dead and the left engine screaming at full takeoff power, it wanted to do only one thing: flip over and die. As the aircraft banked sharply to the right wingtip dipped terrifyingly close to the grassy verge of the runway. The stall warning horn began to blare, a loud, rhythmic whoop whoop that vibrated in the bones of everyone on board. It was the sound of impending death. Richard Sterling, the man with 25,000 hours, the man who claimed to be the god of the cockpit, was paralyzed. His hands were locked on the yoke in a death grip, but he wasn't flying. He was frozen in the startle effect, a psychological phenomenon where the brain shuts down in the face of sudden, overwhelming terror. He stared at the artificial horizon, which was tilting past 45 degrees, his mouth open, no sound coming out. Alicia didn't freeze. "I have controls!" she screamed again, her voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms. She stomped on the left rudder pedal with all her strength. It was a physical battle. The asymmetric thrust was trying to twist the plane into the ground. She had to use brute force to keep the nose straight. Simultaneously, she grabbed the yoke, fighting the plane's desire to roll over. "Power is set! Airspeed 140, climbing!" Alicia announced, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The plane shuddered, the left engine roaring like a dragon, dragging the dead weight of the right side into the sky. Slowly, agonizingly, the wings leveled. The terrifying view of the New Jersey swamp rushing up at them was replaced by the gray, turbulent sky. "Positive rate," Alicia said, her eyes scanning the instruments. "Gear up." Richard didn't move. He was hyperventilating, his face the color of ash. Alicia reached across the center console, smacking his hand away from the landing gear lever, and pulled it up herself. Thump, thump. The wheels retracted. The drag reduced. The plane surged forward, gaining precious speed. "Declare emergency," Alicia ordered, not asking. She was flying the plane, managing the systems, and now she had to manage the captain. "Richard, talk to the tower. Declare the emergency." Richard blinked, snapping out of his trance. He looked at Alicia, then at the dead engine gauge, then out the window. He realized he was still alive. His ego, bruised and battered, instantly went into defensive mode. He couldn't let her be the hero. He keyed the mic, his voice shaking. "Teterboro Tower. Apex 404. We have, a slight engine issue." "Slight?" Alicia snapped, banking the plane gently to the left to avoid the populated area of Hackensack. "We have a catastrophic failure on number 2 and fire indications. Tell them we are returning immediately, and request fire trucks." Richard glared at her, hate burning in his eyes. He hated her because she was right. He hated her because she had just saved his life. He hated her because she was witnessing his failure. "Tower, Apex 404, returning to field. 1 engine out," Richard said, omitting the fire trucks to downplay the severity. "Apex 404, roger. Runways 19 and 6 are closed for you. Fire rescue is rolling. You are cleared to land on any runway. Wind is 330 at 25, gusting 40. The wind had shifted. It was a direct crosswind now. Landing a heavy jet with one engine in a severe crosswind was one of the hardest maneuvers in aviation. If you mess it up, the wing drops, scrapes the runway, and the plane cartwheels into a fireball. "I'll take it from here," Richard said, his voice returning to its usual arrogant growl. He reached for the yoke. "Negative!" Alicia barked, holding the controls firm. "I am the pilot flying. You are unstable. Run the engine failure in flight checklist. Do your job, Captain." Richard hesitated. He wanted to fight her physically for the controls, but he knew the flight data recorder, the black box, was recording every control input. If they crashed while fighting over the yoke, the investigation would blame him. He sat back, fuming, his hands trembling as he pulled out the quick reference handbook. "Checklist," he muttered, sounding like a petulant child. "Throttle, idle, fuel control switch, cut off." Alicia navigated the heavy jet through the turbulence. The air over New Jersey was rough, tossing the wounded bird around. She had to constantly work the rudder to keep them flying straight. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her hands were surgical. Behind them, in the cabin, it was a different story. Elias Vance was a man who was used to being in control. He controlled markets, he controlled boardrooms, and he controlled people. But right now, strapped into his beige leather seat, clutching a crystal tumbler of scotch that had splashed all over his $5,000 suit, he was helpless. When the plane had lurched, Vance had seen the ground rushing up. He had heard the bang. He had felt the G-forces slam him sideways. Sarah, the flight attendant, was strapped into her jump seat, pale and praying silently. "What is going on?" Vance shouted, unbuckling his seatbelt against the illuminated sign. "Sarah, get the pilot." "Sir, please sit down," Sarah pleaded. "It's not safe." "I pay $50,000 for this flight," Vance roared, stumbling toward the cockpit door. "I want answers." Inside the cockpit, the tension was thicker than the clouds outside. Alicia was lining up for the approach. The runway was visible ahead, a strip of wet black asphalt in a sea of grey. "You're coming in too fast," Richard criticized, trying to distract her. "You're going to overrun." "Target speed is ref plus 10 for the single engine," Alicia replied calmly. "I'm right on the bug." "You're too high," Richard nitpicked. "Drop the nose." "I'm on the glide slope, Richard. Shut up and monitor the flaps." The cockpit door burst open. Elias Vance stood there, holding the frame to steady himself. "What the hell are you idiots doing?" Vance screamed over the wind noise. "We almost crashed." Richard spun around in his seat. "Mr. Vance, please return to your seat. We had a mechanical anomaly. I have it under control. I'm guiding us down." "You," Vance spat. "I saw the wing dip. I saw the ground. Who is flying this thing?" Vance looked past Richard's shoulder. He saw Richard's hands in his lap. He saw Alicia's hands gripping the yoke, her muscles tense, her eyes locked on the runway. He saw her feet working the rudder pedals rhythmically. "She is?" Vance asked, stunned. "The paperwork girl is flying the plane?" "I'm monitoring her inputs," Richard lied quickly. It's standard procedure to let the first officer handle the easier phases. "Landing with one engine in a storm is the easier phase?" Vance asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Sit down," Alicia shouted without turning her head. Her voice was commanding, carrying an authority that made Vance instantly shut his mouth. "Sit down and strap in, or you will break your neck when we touch down. Now." Vance stared at her back. He had never been spoken to like that. Not by an employee, not by a woman, and certainly not by someone Richard had dismissed as incompetent. But in her voice, he heard something he recognized: competence, absolute, unwavering focus. He retreated to the cabin and buckled in. "You're in big trouble," Richard whispered to Alicia. "You just yelled at a billionaire client. You're finished." "Focus on the landing gear, Captain," Alicia said. "3 green?" "3 green," Richard grumbled. They crossed the threshold of the runway. The crosswind hit them hard. The plane tried to drift left, off the tarmac. Alicia kicked the rudder, aligning the nose with the center line, and simultaneously dipped the left wing into the wind. It was a textbook cross-control maneuver, something pilots practice for years to master. Screech. The left main gear touched down smoothly, then the right, then the nose. "Reverse thrust available only on engine 1, Alicia called out. "Brakes manual." She fought the plane as it tried to veer toward the dead engine. She applied heavy braking, the anti-skid system pulsing. The fire trucks were racing alongside them, lights flashing. The jet slowed, 80 knots, 60 knots, taxi speed. Alicia exhaled, a long, shaky breath. She guided the plane off the active runway and brought it to a stop on the taxiway. "Parking brake set," she whispered. She slumped slightly in her seat, the adrenaline crash hitting her. She had done it. She had saved the plane, the passengers, and the crew. Richard unbuckled his harness. He didn't say, "Good job." He didn't say thank you. He turned to her, his face twisted into a mask of pure malice. "Listen to me," he hissed, pointing a finger in her face. "When we opened that door, I flew this landing. I saved the plane. You were freezing up. You panicked. If you say one word differently, I will make sure you never fly a kite again, let alone a jet. I know people at the FAA. I know the owner of Apex. I will bury you." Alicia slowly unbuckled her harness. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You think you know the owner of Apex?" she asked softly. "I play golf with the CEO, you little girl," Richard sneered. "Now get your bag and get out of my cockpit. You're relieved of duty." Alicia stood up. She picked up her flight bag. She smoothed her uniform. "After you, Captain," she said. The silence inside the Gulf Stream G65ER, as it came to a halt on the taxiway, was heavy, broken only by the hum of the avionics cooling fans and the distant wail of sirens outside. The aircraft, usually a sanctuary of luxury, felt like a crime scene. Richard Sterling sat in the left seat, his chest heaving. The panic that had paralyzed him during the emergency was receding, replaced by a cold, calculating survival instinct. His mind was racing, constructing a narrative brick by brick. He knew how these things worked. The NTSB would investigate, but that would take months. The immediate narrative, the story that would be told to the client, the company, and the press in the next hour, was up for grabs, and Richard intended to grab it with both hands. He looked over at Alicia. She was slumped slightly, her head bowed, exhaling a long, trembling breath. To an observer, she looked defeated. To Richard, she looked like a scapegoat. "Don't say a word," Richard hissed, unbuckling his harness with aggressive snaps. "You're in shock. You're traumatized. Let the professionals handle the talking." Alicia didn't look at him. She was busy securing the fuel pumps, her hands moving with the muscle memory of a true professional. But Richard interpreted her silence as submission. He smirked. He had her. He stood up, smoothing his uniform jacket, checking his reflection in the dark glass of the cockpit display. He adjusted his tie. He needed to look like the hero. He needed to look like the man who had wrestled a 60-ton beast to the ground while his diversity hire co-pilot cowered in the corner. "Open the main door, Sarah," Richard barked into the intercom. "Let's get Mr. Vance off this thing." Richard stepped out of the cockpit and into the cabin. The smell of spilled scotch and fear hung in the air. Elias Vance was pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. Sarah, the flight attendant, was crouching near the galley, looking shaken. "Mr. Vance," Richard said, his voice dropping to a soothing, baritone register. He walked over and placed a steady hand on the billionaire's shoulder. "We're down. We're safe. My apologies for the rough arrival. That crosswind was wicked, and with the engine failure, well, it was a worst-case scenario." Vance looked up, his eyes darting between Richard and the open cockpit door. "We almost flipped over, Sterling. I saw the ground. I was looking down at the grass." "I know, sir," Richard lied, nodding gravely. "It was a critical failure of the stabilizer trim. I had to fight the yoke with everything I had. It took every hour of my 30 years of experience to keep us upright. But I wasn't going to let anything happen to you." Vance unbuckled, his legs shaking as he stood up. "And the girl? The co-pilot?" Richard sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "She froze. It happens. Panic attack. I had to override her inputs. She was fighting me on the controls, pulling the wrong way. I practically had to wrestle the plane out of her hands." Vance's expression hardened. "She fought you?" "She panicked, sir. It's a terrifying situation for a rookie," Richard said, planting the seed of incompetence deep in the client's mind. "I'll handle it. I'll make sure she's removed from the rotation immediately." The main cabin door hissed open, and the stairs deployed. Cool, damp air rushed into the cabin, carrying the scent of ozone and burnt rubber. "After you, Mr. Vance," Richard said, gesturing gallantly. They descended the stairs onto the wet tarmac. The scene was chaotic. 3 fire trucks were positioned around the jet, their foam cannons aimed at the smoking No. 2 engine. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement. A black Cadillac Escalade, Vance's security detail, screeched to a halt near the wing. But it wasn't just security. Another car had pulled up, a sleek, silver Mercedes sedan with the Apex Charter logo on the door. Richard's heart leapt. It was Marcus Cole, the director of operations. Richard smiled internally. Perfect. He could file his verbal report right now in front of the client and seal Alicia's fate before she even stepped off the plane. Richard walked briskly toward Marcus, waving his hand as if to say, "No need for applause." "Marcus," Richard called out over the noise of the wind. "Glad you're here. We have a situation." Marcus Cole was a tall, imposing man with a military background. He stepped out of the Mercedes, his face unreadable behind rimless glasses. He looked at the smoking engine, then at Richard. "Captain Sterling," Marcus said, his voice neutral. "Everyone in one piece?" "Thanks to me, yes," Richard said, loud enough for Vance and the gathering ground crew to hear. "Catastrophic failure on V1. We lost the right engine, then we hit shear. I had to perform a single engine recovery in gusting conditions. It was hairy." "I bet," Marcus said, his eyes drifting to the air stairs. "Look, Marcus, we need to talk about staffing," Richard continued, pressing his advantage. "Thorne, the new first officer. She's a liability. She froze up there. Actually, worse than froze. She was screaming, hysterical. I had to shout at her to get her to retract the gear. She nearly killed us." Elias Vance, who had been listening while his security team checked him over, stepped forward. He looked furious. "Is that true, Sterling? She was screaming?" "Sobbing, Mr. Vance. Sobbing," Richard embellished, shaking his head sadly. "I don't blame her, really. She shouldn't have been in that seat. It's a failure of the hiring protocol. But don't worry, I'll write the report. She won't fly for Apex again." At that moment, Alicia appeared at the top of the air stairs. She didn't look hysterical. She didn't look like she had been sobbing. She walked down the steps with a measured, deliberate gait. She held her flight bag in her left hand, and her uniform jacket was buttoned correctly. Her face was a mask of stone. She reached the tarmac and walked toward the group. The wind whipped a few strands of hair across her face, but she didn't brush them away. She stopped 5 feet from Richard. "Captain," Alicia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the wind. Richard turned to her, his face twisting into a sneer of superiority. "Miss Thorne, I was just explaining to Mr. Vance and Director Cole why you're relieved of duty effective immediately. Go wait in the crew lounge. I don't want you on the tarmac." Alicia didn't move. She looked at Marcus. "Director Cole, did you bring the file I requested?" Richard laughed, a short, sharp bark of incredulity. "The file you requested? Who do you think you are? You're a junior first officer on probation. You don't request files. You request an Uber to take you home because you're fired." Marcus didn't laugh. He ignored Richard entirely. He walked past the captain, past the billionaire client, and stopped directly in front of Alicia. "I have it right here, ma'am," Marcus said. The word hung in the air. "Ma'am." Not Alicia, not first officer. "Ma'am." It was spoken with deference, with the tone of a subordinate addressing a superior. Richard blinked, confused. "Marcus, what are you doing? I told you to fire her." "You don't have the authority to fire her, Richard," Marcus said, turning slowly to face the captain. "But she certainly has the authority to fire you." "What are you talking about?" Richard sputtered, his face flushing red. "I'm the pilot in command. She's a nobody. She's a diversity quota." "That nobody," Alicia said, stepping forward, "is the reason you are standing on this tarmac and not being scraped off the runway in a body bag." She reached out and took the leather folio from Marcus. She opened it with a snap. "You mentioned earlier that you play golf with the owner of Apex Charter," Alicia said, her eyes boring into Richard's. "You said you know Mr. Henderson." I do," Richard stammered, sensing the ground shifting beneath his feet, but unable to stop his momentum. "I know him well." "Mr. Henderson sold Apex Charter 6 months ago," Alicia said calmly. "He sold the entire fleet, the hangars and the operating certificate. Do you know who bought it, Richard?" Richard stared at her. His mouth opened, but no words came out. A cold dread began to pool in his stomach. "Read it," Alicia said, shoving the document against his chest. Richard grabbed the paper instinctively. His eyes scanned the legal text. Certificate of ownership. Apex Charter, a subsidiary of Thorne Aviation Holdings. CEO and sole proprietor, Alicia Thorne. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Richard looked up from the paper to the young black woman standing before him. The woman he had ordered to fetch coffee. The woman he had insulted. The woman he had just framed for incompetence. "You," Richard whispered. "You own the plane?" "I own the plane," Alicia confirmed, her voice hard as steel. "I own the fuel you wasted by ignoring the weather report. I own the uniform on your back. And I own the company that has been overpaying you for 20 years. Elias Vance let out a sharp whistle. He looked at Alicia with a sudden, dawning respect. "Wait a minute. You own the whole airline. Then why were you flying right seat?" "Because I wanted to know the truth," Alicia said, turning to the billionaire. "I kept receiving reports of a toxic culture among our senior captains. Reports of racism, sexism, and dangerous arrogance. I decided the only way to verify it was to put on a uniform and see for myself." She turned her gaze back to Richard, who was now trembling, not from the cold, but from terror. "And you, Richard," she said softly, "you gave me quite the show." "Now wait just a minute," Richard stammered, trying to find his footing, trying to use his size and his voice to regain control. "Okay, so you bought the company. Congratulations. That doesn't change the fact that I flew the plane. You can't fire me for saving the boss's life. I'm the hero here." "You're a liar, Richard," Alicia said. "Marcus," Richard pleaded, looking to the director. Tell her about my record." "Your record is irrelevant," Alicia interrupted, "because I'm not firing you for your personality. I'm firing you for gross negligence and fraud." "Fraud?" Richard choked out. Alicia pointed to the aircraft. "You told Mr. Vance you flew the landing. You told Marcus you flew the landing. But we both know the flight data recorder will show 0 inputs from the left seat from the moment the engine failed until we stopped on this taxiway." Richard went pale. He had forgotten about the black box. In his arrogance, he thought his word was the only law. "The cockpit voice recorder," Alicia continued relentlessly, "will hear you hyperventilating. It will hear you praying. It will hear me begging you to raise the landing gear because you were too terrified to move your hands." "No," Richard whimpered. "And it will hear you threaten me," Alicia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It will hear you tell me to lie. You tried to blackmail the owner of your company on her own airplane." She turned to Marcus. "Pull his credentials. Immediately. I want him escorted off the airfield. He is not to enter the operations building. He is not to enter the crew lounge." "Understood, Miss Thorne," Marcus said. He gestured to 2 large security guards standing by the gate. "Gentlemen." The guards moved in. Richard Sterling, the man who had walked down the stairs like a king, now looked small, old, and pathetic. He backed away, his hands up. "Alicia, Miss Thorne, please," Richard begged, his voice cracking. "I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in college. You can't do this. I've flown for 30 years. "And you won't fly for 30 minutes more," Alicia said coldly. "You are a danger to my passengers and a disgrace to this profession." "Mr. Vance!" Richard shouted, appealing to the client as the guards grabbed his arms. "Help me! She's crazy! She's vindictive!" Elias Vance looked at Richard with pure disgust. He brushed a speck of invisible dust off his lapel. "Sterling," Vance said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I run a tech company. I deal with data. And the data says you're a liar who tried to blame a woman for your own cowardice. If Ms. Thorne hadn't been in that cockpit, I'd be dead in a swamp right now." Vance turned to Alicia and extended his hand. "Ms. Thorne, I apologize for my behavior for earlier. I didn't know who was really flying the plane." Alicia shook his hand firmly. "Apology accepted, Mr. Vance. We will have a new crew and a replacement aircraft ready for you in 2 hours. On the house, of course." "Make it 3, Vance smiled. "I'd like to buy you a drink first. I want to hear how you managed that crosswind landing without a captain." Alicia watched as the security guards dragged Richard towards the perimeter gate. He was still shouting, still making excuses, but his voice was being carried away by the wind, becoming smaller and smaller until it was nothing. She turned back to Marcus. "Marcus, verify the download of the CVR data immediately. He's going to sue. He's going to go to the press. I want the evidence ready." "Already on it, boss," Marcus said. "What about his personal effects in the hangar? His locker?" Alicia looked at the spot where Richard had disappeared. "Box it up," she said. "Mail it to his house. And Marcus, make sure it's a small box. He doesn't have much of a legacy left to pack." Richard Sterling didn't disappear into the night. Men like Richard, fueled by narcissism and a lifetime of unchecked privilege, do not accept defeat. They redefine it as a conspiracy. 3 weeks after the incident at Teterboro, the atmosphere at Thorn Aviation Holdings was tense. Alicia sat in her corner office, overlooking the skyline of Manhattan. Her desk was covered in legal briefs. "He's on the Daily Truth podcast right now," Marcus said, standing by the window, tablet in hand. "Live." Alicia sighed, rubbing her temples. "Play it." Marcus tapped the screen and connected it to the office speakers. Richard's voice filled the room. It was smoother now, practiced. He wasn't the frantic, terrified man in the cockpit anymore. He was the calm, seasoned victim. "Look, I've flown for 30 years, Richard's voice crooned through the speakers. "I've flown presidents. I've flown rock stars. And then, one day, this young woman buys the company with daddy's money, hops into the cockpit, and almost puts a Gulf Stream into the swamps of Jersey. When I took the controls to save our lives, she fired me. It's a classic case of woke corporate culture, removing the experienced hands to make room for a poster child. Now I'm blacklisted. I can't feed my family." The host gasped dramatically. "And she owns the company, so she's the judge, jury, and executioner." "Exactly," Richard said. "It's unsafe. I'm speaking out not for me, but for the flying public. Do you want your pilot hired based on skill or based on demographics?" Alicia signaled Marcus to cut the audio. The room fell silent. "Our stock took a 4% hit this morning," Marcus reported grimly. 2 clients cancelled their contracts. They're buying his story, Alicia. He's turning this into a culture war. He's suing us for wrongful termination and defamation. He wants $10 million. Alicia stood up and walked to the window. She looked at the city below, the city she had conquered through grit, intelligence, and flawless execution. Richard was trying to burn down her house because he wasn't allowed to be the master of it. "He's counting on the NDA," Alicia said softly. "He knows employee records are confidential. He knows we usually settle to avoid bad press." "The lawyers suggest we settle," Marcus admitted. "Give him $1 million, make him sign a gag order, and he goes away." Alicia turned around. Her expression was terrifyingly calm. It was the same look she had when the engine exploded, absolute focus in the face of disaster. "If we pay him, we validate his lie," Alicia said. "He thinks the cockpit is a boys' club where the secrets stay behind the reinforced door. He forgot one thing." "What's that?" "The FAA hearing is next Tuesday," Alicia said, a cold smile touching her lips. "And since he publicly accused me of pilot error and endangering the flight to the media, he has waived his right to privacy regarding the incident specifics." He opened the door. She walked back to her desk and picked up a small, orange memory drive. "Marcus, call the legal team. We aren't settling. We're going to the hearing. And tell them to bring the audio equipment. I want the world to hear exactly who Richard Sterling is. The hearing. The Federal Aviation Administration Regional Hearing Room was packed. Because of Richard's media tour, the press had descended on the proceedings like vultures. Cameras lined the back of the room. This was no longer just a license review. It was a spectacle. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by a high-priced lawyer. He wore a slightly shabby suit, playing the part of the downtrodden working man. He looked confident. He waved to a few supporters in the crowd. Alicia sat on the other side, alone except for her corporate counsel. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight ahead. The presiding officer, a stern woman named Director Holloway, banged the gavel. We are here to review the license status of Captain Richard Sterling following the incident on Flight 404, and to address the counterclaims of wrongful termination lodged against Thorn Aviation. Richard's lawyer stood up first. He was theatrical, pacing the floor. Director, my client is a hero. He was fired for saving a plane that his inexperienced co-pilot, who happens to be the owner, nearly crashed. We have statements from him detailing how Ms. Thorn froze at the controls. This termination is retaliatory. We ask for his license to be reinstated and for damages to be awarded. Director Holloway looked at Alicia. Ms. Thorn, your response? Alicia stood up. She didn't pace. She didn't use flowery language. Director, Mr. Sterling has spent the last 3 weeks telling the world that I panicked, and he saved the day. He claims I am incompetent. He claims he was the pilot, flying. That is the record, Richard's lawyer interrupted. However, Alicia continued, her voice rising over the interruption. Aviation is not a business of stories. It is a business of data. And the Gulfstream G650 is equipped with a cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, which records every sound on the flight deck. It also records the control inputs. Richard shifted in his seat. He whispered something to his lawyer, who frowned. We have brought the raw data from the NTSB analysis, Alicia said. I would like to enter Exhibit A into the record, the audio recording of the takeoff roll and subsequent emergency. Objection, Richard's lawyer shouted. That is confidential crew data. Not anymore, Director Holloway ruled. Mr. Sterling made public claims about specific actions in that cockpit. The evidence is admissible to verify those claims. Play the tape. The room went deadly silent. Alicia nodded to the technician. A static hiss filled the room. Then, the sounds of the engine spooling up. Please note, the text in italics is the recording played in the courtroom. Richard's voice. Tape. I don't need you for anything. Titterborough Tower. Apex 404. Ready for taxi. The crowd murmured. His tone was aggressive, nasty. Not the kindly veteran he played on TV. Richard's voice. Tape. I'm saving fuel because someone wanted to overload us. Takeoff power set. Alicia's voice. Tape. Captain, check engine 2 vibration. Richard's voice. Tape. It's fine. Stop looking for problems. Richard's face in the courtroom began to turn red. The arrogance was palpable. Then came the sound of the explosion. Bang! The sound of the stall warning filled the courtroom speakers. Whoop, 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 whoop. Alicia's voice. Tape. Engine failure. I have controls. Then, the most damning sound of all. Richard's voice. Tape. Heavy, panicked breathing. Oh God. Oh God, we're dead. Oh God. Alicia's voice. Tape. Positive rate. Gear up. Richard, gear up. Richard's voice. Tape. Whimpering. I can't look. Alicia's voice. Tape. Declare emergency. Richard, do your job. The recording continued. It played for 2 agonizing minutes. It captured Alicia's calm, steel commands. It captured Richard sobbing, praying, and at one point screaming for his mother. It captured him refusing to touch the controls until the plane was already safe and level, and finally, it captured the moment on the taxiway. Richard's voice, tape. Listen to me. When we opened that door, I flew this landing. If you say one word differently, I will bury you. The tape clicked off. The silence in the hearing room was heavier than lead. No one moved. The reporters were typing furiously. The hero narrative had just been nuked from orbit. Alicia looked across the aisle. Richard was slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. His lawyer was physically distancing himself, moving his chair slightly away. The telemetry data, Alicia said, holding up a second document, confirms that at no point during the emergency did the left-seat pilot make a corrective input. The recovery, the approach, and the landing were performed 100% by the first officer. She turned to Richard. You wanted to be judged on skill, Richard? You just were. The verdict and the fall. The fallout was swift, brutal, and total. The FAA revoked Richard Sterling's pilot license immediately. Not just a suspension, a permanent revocation for gross negligence and lying to federal investigators. He would never legally touch the controls of an aircraft again, not even a Cessna. But the legal karma was worse. Because Richard had solicited donations online for his legal defense fund based on his fraudulent story, he was charged with wire fraud. The Daily Truth podcast deleted the episode and issued a retraction. But the internet is forever. The clip of him whimpering, "I can't look," while Alicia saved the plane, went viral. It was remixed, mocked, and shared millions of times. He became the face of incompetent arrogance. A month later, Alicia stood on the tarmac at Heathrow Airport in London. The G655ER, her jet, gleamed in the sunlight. It had been repaired, the engine replaced, and the livery polished. Marcus walked up to her, holding a tablet. You want to see the latest numbers? He asked. Sure, Alicia said. Since the hearing, charter requests are up 40%. Marcus smiled. Everyone wants to fly with the captain who saved flight 404. And Mr. Vance just signed an exclusive 3-year contract. He said he feels safer knowing the owner is watching. Good, Alicia said. She looked at the cockpit window. Did you hear about Richard? Marcus asked quietly. I don't track former employees, Alicia replied. He's working at a rental car counter in Newark, Marcus said. I heard a customer recognized him yesterday and asked if he needed a co-pilot to park the Corolla. Alicia didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just nodded. It wasn't about revenge anymore. The universe had balanced the scales. Richard was exactly where his character destined him to be, and she was exactly where her hard work had placed her. A new pilot walked up the stairs. He was an older white man, perhaps 60, with a kind face. He saw Alicia and stopped. Miss Thorne? He asked. Yes, Captain? He extended a hand. I'm Captain Miller. I'm the replacement. I just wanted to say, I listened to the tapes. It's an honor to fly your aircraft, ma'am. Alicia shook his hand firmly. The honor is mine, Captain Miller. Just do me one favor. Anything. Check the vibration on engine 2 before we start. Captain Miller smiled. Already checked it twice, ma'am. We're ready to fly. Alicia watched the jet taxi out. She took a deep breath of the kerosene-scented air. The sky was wide, open, and for the first time in a long time, completely clear. She turned and walked back toward her terminal. She had an empire to run. Richard Sterling thought his privilege was a shield that could protect him from his own incompetence. He thought he could bully, lie, and smear his way to victory against a woman he deemed unworthy. But in the high-stakes world of aviation, gravity doesn't care about your ego, and the truth is always recorded in the black box. Alicia Thorne didn't just win a lawsuit. She proved that true power isn't about how loud you yell. It's about how well you fly when the engines fail. Richard lost his license, his reputation, and his dignity, ending up parking cars while Alicia soared to new heights. It's a powerful reminder. Never underestimate the person sitting next to you. You never know. They might just own the plane. Wow, what a ride. I hope you enjoyed this story of high-flying drama and ultimate karma. If you loved watching Alicia take down the arrogant Captain Sterling, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Alicia's shoes? Would you have fired him on the spot or waited for the hearing? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about underdogs taking charge and instant regret, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.